In the very first 2020 Mass Effect teaser trailer, we hear scrambled audio. But Arc 6 is away Godspeed is one of the clearer lines that we confirm what is actually being said. While there's a lot of speculation about what this Arc 6 is actually referencing, there is one popular theory. Arc 6 could be the lost Quilicia. But what if it isn't? Let's look into what Arc 6 could possibly be and go over what it could mean for Mass Effect 5. Now the first question is, was the Quilicia the 5th or 6th Ark? In Andromeda, we know of 6 total initiative ships that were sent to Andromeda, but the Nexus isn't called an Ark in any of the Andromeda material or in-game. It's called a space station, or a flagship, or a hub, but it is mostly referred to as a Nexus and is never referred to as an Ark. Even in the initiative briefing trailers, the Nexus and Arks are referred to separately. The Nexus and Arks, never combined as the Arks. But the wiki does call the Nexus a flagship Ark, but I couldn't find a source for this. So while the chances of this being the Quilicia are obviously still possible, there is still no confirmation that this actually is referencing the lost Quarian Ark. And I'll get into other possibilities of what this Ark could be if it isn't the Quilicia in a bit. But first, when we look at the 2020 trailer, it's important to contextualize all of the lines and visuals and remember that the audio in the trailer is retelling a chronological timeline. And I'm going to cover the first trailer that was revealed that didn't have removed audio, because the current version up on the Mass Effect YouTube has been edited and copyrighted audio has since been removed. So with that said, here is the timeline of events that are referenced in the original trailer. First, we have this audio of the radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, which aired on public radio in 1938. Next, we have audio from the events of the Apollo 11 landing from July 20th, 1969. We then hear audio mentioning Arcturus Station, which is most likely referencing the first contact and beginning of the Relay 314 incident, which happened in 2157. And this next line, humanity stands as partners in the galaxy, could be referencing when humanity got its first human seat on the council, or when Shepard became a Spectre. I put 2183 because that's when the events of Mass Effect 1 begin, but this could be referencing when humans were granted an embassy on the Citadel in 2165. Either way, it still fits in the timeline before the events of Mass Effect 1. And this next line is the line that we're focusing on. Arc 6 is away, Godspeed. And this line is said right before we see the damage relay and the audio of the Reaper War with the Reaper sound effect. So this timeline reference would put Arc 6 leaving around the same time as the Quarian Ark, right before Mass Effect 3, and before the events of the Reaper War. Remember that moving forward. The second to last audio is kind of scrambled, but you can make out we've lost contact. This would be after Mass Effect 3 and the Reaper War, and could be referencing contact being lost after the explosions of the relays, or could be some kind of aftermath of the Reaper War that we don't know about yet. And the final audio sounds like it says anomalies found all across space. And Lady Insanity broke this down bit by bit, breaking down the audio and found some additional information, and I'll link that below if you want to check that out. But this anomalies found all across space is after the Reaper War. When, we don't know, nor do we know what it's referencing. And because this is after the Reaper sounds and the Reaper War audio, we have no idea where this is on the timeline they've laid out here. So with that timeline mapped out, that brings us back to Arc 6. Could this be the Quarian Ark? Like I said earlier, the Nexus is never referred to as an Ark, which makes the Quilicia the 5th Ark, not the 6th. But the timeline of chronological events in the trailer puts this Arc 6 departing around the exact same time that the other Arks would have left. We know that in December of 2185, the Nexus and first 4 Arks leave, and the Quilicia was experiencing technical difficulties and would depart in 2186 instead, right before the Reaper War. So if Arc 6 left around the same time that we know the other Arks and Nexus left, where did Arc 6 come from? And it's important to note that there is a human giving the notification that Arc 6 is away. That means that Ark 6 was communicating with either the Nexus or someone else to indicate that they had departed, and that person was a human. So I don't think that means that this is a secret Ark. If it's numbered 6, it would be chronological to the other Arks and would mean affiliation with the Initiative. Did the Initiative have other Arks that we don't know about? Could this be one of Gian Garson's many secrets? I have no idea. I feel like timeline-wise it makes sense for this to be the Quilicia, but again we have no official confirmation that the Nexus was actually included in the list of Arks. I don't really have any solid theories around this, just pure speculation, because the timeline of this Ark leaving is pretty solid in the trailer's timeline. But any mention of an Ark which are related to Andromeda's events, and a line from Andromeda, is a pretty clear reference to Andromeda. And the full line in the trailer is Ark 6 is away Godspeed, and Godspeed is a line that is said directly to Ryder and Andromeda. The full quote is Departure Vector Verified Tempest, Godspeed Pathfinder, which plays at Andromeda the first time you take off in the Tempest. And while this may be a stretch, the two voice actors from the Tempest takeoff and the trailer do sound the same. So the reference to a line spoken directly to the Pathfinder and a direct mention of the Arks are clearly trying to show an Andromeda connection, especially when the Arks were specifically headed to the Andromeda timeline, and we have one major cliffhanger regarding the long-lost Quarian Ark. So why would they mention Ark 6 if it isn't the Quarian Ark? Why would they introduce a brand new Ark and then kind of shove it in the already established timeline? You'd think if there was another Ark, we would have learned about it. And the Arks that were sent contain all of the races that were recognized by the Council. So what would even be a reason for an additional Ark if all the intended races were already aboard the other Arks? I can't seem to find a reason for there to be a new Ark. We would have already heard about it. We would have learned about it from Garson or Tan or someone else because hiding a whole Ark would have been impossible. So I don't think it makes sense for there to just suddenly be a new Ark that also leaves right before the Reaper War. I think we would have known, story-wise, in my opinion anyways. So I think this could be referencing the lost Quarian Ark, the Quilicia, because of this timeline implication and because of a comment made back in 2017. After Andromeda release and was subsequently put on ice, Casey Hudson, who was the BioWare GM at the time, said that BioWare knew the Quarian Ark would have to be addressed in a future installment at some point. It's the one plot thread from Andromeda that he mentions. And I think that could be what this is. If that's the case, that would mean that Mass Effect 5 will take place around the year 2819, because the Quarian Ark's last known whereabouts were 30 years before Ryder's story even takes place. And despite not seeing any 100% confirmed Quarians in the concept art, I think the Quarian Ark is a storyline they're going to explore. And it inevitably means that the timeline for the next game will be pushed forward after the events of the Reaper War. Considering the last known events of the Quilicia were in 2753, during the events of the novel Annihilation. And with the Quarian Ark being left on a major cliffhanger that upset many fans, I think it would upset fans if a new Ark was introduced and focused on, while the Quilicia remains lost. I just don't think it makes sense to introduce a new Ark when there is a lingering story thread that fans want answered. And I also don't think it makes sense to introduce another Andromeda-bound Ark if we aren't returning there. So I do think this could be another indication that the next game will take place in the Andromeda timeline. Though I think majority of the visuals so far have been pointing to the Milky Way galaxy, I think a lot of the textual and audio clues we've been shown, coupled with Gamble's tweets, indicate a fairly decent-sized Andromeda story inclusion. And I've already said that this isn't necessarily what I want, but I do think that a lot of the clues are pointing in that direction, especially if Liara is older in the trailer. And it's also important to remember that when this trailer was released, Mass Effect 5 had been in production for roughly a year and a half, and its narrative lead, Mary DeMarle, hadn't been hired yet, and things may have also changed since 2020, so while they maybe knew at this time what direction they were going in, this trailer was most likely intended just to evoke nostalgia and give some clues in a general direction of where the next game will go. Or maybe It was extremely specific and intentional. But if this is the Quilicia, let's look at what that could mean timeline-wise. At the end of Andromeda, we get the Quilicia's final transmission. They're talking about a situation not under control and to avoid until further updates. But the message is untraceable, meaning they don't know the exact date the transmission was sent, nor do they know the location of where the transmission was sent from. This leaves room to change what this transmission actually is. But it does sound like it's connected to the events of Andromeda Annihilation, which came out after Andromeda did. And while you may hear a lot of people say that this was basically the DLC in novel form, that isn't true. There was never any announced official DLC for Andromeda, and the 3 supposed canceled DLCs were fake. I made a whole video on it because the fact that someone was pretending to work for BioWare on Facebook, and those fake leaks are still spread today, kind of blows my mind. And that's not to say no DLC was ever going to happen, because it most likely was, especially if you look at BioWare's previous DLC patterns. But the 3 specific supposed canceled DLCs, including the one about the Quarian Ark, was a fake leak circulating on Facebook. Additionally, 2 months after Andromeda's release, multiplayer support was still happening, and a new Apex mission mentions the Quilicia. At the end of the announcement, there is a line that says, "Trying to boost the signal. Unknown if. Tech seems to be helping even if we don't know the. Back to Quilicia. Way home." If this multiplayer Apex mission was setting up to connect to a future DLC in the future, then this was setting up communication with the Quarian Ark. But the wording is interesting. Way home sounds like the home is the Milky Way. Could the Quarian Ark have turned around? Or was this referencing their intended future home in the Helios cluster? But based on the announcement, it sounds like they were setting up multiple transmissions to be discoverable from this remnant observatory, and that the Ket were also trying to study the remnant technology that was capturing these transmissions. Unfortunately, because Andromeda stopped receiving updates shortly after this, there was never any follow-up, nor was there any DLC. So while this looks like it was potentially setting up connections to the Quarian Ark storyline, nothing was ever announced. Almost a year and a half later, in November of 2018, Annihilation is finally released after its delay. And the novel was always going to exist and never replaced a DLC. The author has spoken about this, and the novel doesn't finalize the story to the Quarian Ark anyways. It just leaves it on another cliffhanger. If you haven't read Annihilation, it's really good. I'll provide a detailed summary, but I do recommend reading it as well. So, spoilers for Annihilation. 30 years before Mass Effect Andromeda, the novel starts with the sleepwalker Team Blue 7 being woken up early from cryo, because 10% of the Drell pods have accumulated ice on them. When investigated, the Drell are found to be dead with black tongues and sores. The death count comes to 461 dead Drell and 2 dead Hanar. Those who have been woken up investigate and find suspicious substances, coming to the realization that whatever killed the Drell and Hanar is a manufactured virus. After this discovery, a loud bang hits the ship, and the Sleepwalker team realize that the shields are also down on the Quilicia. While trying to figure out what's going on, the team realizes that while the Drell and Hanar are dead, their pod information says they are alive and well. One of the Sleepwalkers and leader of the Team Blue 7 disappears for several hours. During this time, Senna was with his grandmother, who is actually an ancestor VI. Liatnir died during the Geth War over 3 centuries prior to the events of Annihilation, but her personality imprint was taken hours before her death. And while the Geth destroyed the main ancestor databanks during the war, Liatnir was never uploaded to it, and was instead stored in a VI within a mobile containment suit and passed down through generations in secrecy. Senna's conversations with Liatnir were very sweet, and the ancestor VI has a hologram of Liatnir that Senna speaks with. Remember this ancestor VI because she becomes important to the story later. During all of this happening, the ship is just pure chaos. Fights break out, more aliens die from the infighting, not even from the virus itself. A Hanar also goes crazy, enjoying all of the chaos and reveling in the death of its crewmates, and is eventually jailed. Because of this Hanar's weird and creepy behavior, the Hanar are suspected to be behind the virus, known as the Fortinbras Plague, due to the virus's structure. Finally, the ship's captain makes an announcement on the comms channel. Captain Ketsi Olam Vasquilacia details the plague's symptoms, susceptible races, and reveals that once transmitted, the virus is fatal. She also reveals that several systems are offline, including temperature control, lighting control, person-to-person comms, water dispensation, shields, transportation, sensors, and locks. She then tells the crew that they have limited supplies on hand, which, when the Quilicia launched, they were already given less supplies than the other Ark ships, so they are even more depleted. They are still far from the Nexus at this point, and the closest planet is 3 weeks travel away and is a barren planet. She tells everyone to remain calm, isolate if you're showing symptoms, and good luck. It was a terrible, dooming message, causing the Ark inhabitants to go even crazier. The Batarians riot, the Hanar pray, the Drell are using biotics to gather their dead, the Elcor go dark, and the Quarians are unaffected. Eventually, this does change though, and a Quarian child dies in its mother's arms. At this point, a total of 606 Quilicia inhabitants have died. 461 Drell, 3 Hanar, 1 Batarian, 1 Volus, and now the Quarian child. Captain Kesti finds out what Senna has been up to. Liat helps Senna with analyzing and troubleshooting the situation at hand. Through Senna's grandmother, he learns that the ship is malfunctioning on purpose, with both having its temperature raised to spread the virus that has now killed several Ark inhabitants and to cover its tracks. Liat helps find a solution to isolate this computer worm, and in doing so, Senna uploaded Liat to the Ark itself. She then is able to hack and destroy the worm herself, but in doing so, her personality will eventually merge with the system. The Hanar thought to be behind the plague is put on trial and is accused of spreading the virus on purpose. But Senna and Annex of the Sleepwalker team suspect the own ship's captain due to her weird behavior. The two follow Captain Kesti, and they find that she meets with the manufacturer of the computer virus, and thus her secret is exposed. When she is confronted, she reveals the truth. Kesti had no hate towards the Drell, and they were just supposed to carry the virus, not get sick. The harmless virus intended for the Drell to spread to other races instead evolved over 150 years and became deadly. She had manufactured the virus herself and paid a kid to dispense the virus into the Drell pods, telling the kid it was perfume and to remind them of home. The computer worm that was spread intentionally raised the temperature of the Ark, which caused the virus to be able to mutate. When asked why she did this, she revealed that she did not want the Quarians to be looked down on again in a new galaxy, and she wouldn't let the Asari, Solarians, Turians, and humans rule the new Andromeda galaxy. She would not be secondhand to Solarians, who had previously tortured her, making her take off her suit, which infected her with algae. She was sick for months, and they called it a prank. So she wanted to create a power vacuum, kill the humans, Quarians, Turians, and Solarians, and let the Quarians rise to the top. Senna, who was actually previously in a relationship with the ship's captain and now murderer, watches as the love of his life recounts her horrible plan. While this trial and reveal was happening, a retrovirus is being made to counter the Fortinbras plague. Yorick, a kind Shakespearean-obsessed Elcor, who became infected himself, was able to design a retrovirus just before succumbing to his own plague infection. Right after the Elcor's retrovirus was finalized and the Elcor died, Senna takes the vial of cure and injects it directly into Kesti's jugular. To repent for her heinous crimes, Kesti walks down near naked down the halls of the ship through every zone. Her body was used to spread the retrovirus until she eventually succumbed to the virus herself and died in the halls of the Quilicia. The epilogue of the story shows that Liat Nir, the grandmother VI that merged with the ship, had finally finished merging with the ship and no longer spoke with the tenderness of Liatnir. The ship confirms that the ship systems are now optimal. The remaining crew returns to Cryo and resumes their journey to Andromeda. Right as Senna is falling asleep in his cryopod, an incoming message is received, but no one was awake to receive it. And the book ends with, "The Chelacia flew in on silence, a glimmer of light in the dark, toward a home that was already calling to them." And with this major cliffhanger, I suspect an actual DLC would have explored the aftermath of this plague and the shakiness of the Ark inhabitants after what they'd experienced. I also think it would have severely divided the races on the Chelacia, and the individuals that boarded the Chelacia with dreams of a new home would have an entirely different outlook after just surviving through an intentional plague and betrayal like this. Maybe it would have made the other races distrust the Quarians even more so. Maybe their genetics would have been altered from the virus itself and the subsequent vaccine. Something also that is important to note is that while the message from the ending of Andromeda seems to be referencing the distress message sent in Annihilation from the Chelacia, with the message being directly from the traitorous captain, we don't know what the incoming message is, nor was there any mention of a message being sent in the epilogue. So we don't know if an additional update was sent after the virus was under control. The author Catherine Valente did say in a Reddit AMA that the book ending with the distress beacon was requested by BioWare and was always planned to be the endpoint. Which is interesting because the novel, it doesn't say it's a distress call being received. It only says incoming message. So if this is a distress beacon being received, what could that have been? The events of Annihilation take place over the course of a few days. So the Chelacia is still 30-ish years out from Andromeda. The Scourge hadn't hit the Nexus yet either. So this leaves another possibility for a potential connection that could be made for future stories. There's a lot of stuff like this in Andromeda, where it could be one thing, but because the game never got a sequel and the story threads were never finalized, it could also literally be anything. The story really does a good job of getting you emotionally invested in the crew of the Chelacia, and I would have loved to meet Senna and Annex in a DLC, and I'm very sad about Yorick dying, as he was such a wholesome Elcor. It made me want an Elcor companion even more. The book also does a very good job of exploring the dynamics between the different races, and we get to learn more about them as well. If you haven't read the novel, my summary is just surface level. The novel is very good and it's written very well. And if this Arc 6 does turn out to be the Quarian Ark, this book will no doubt have relevancy in Mass Effect 5. And I saw someone say a while back that there were Geth on the Chelacia. But rereading the novel, I couldn't find any evidence of that. There are VI like the grandmother VI, but no Geth, unless I missed something. Either way, I don't know if I think there could even be Geth on the Chelacia. Maybe if they wanted to write that, sure, I guess it could be added. But it would have to be a very tiny population that essentially invaded the Ark without anyone's knowledge. But we do know from the ending of Mass Effect 3 that if you broker peace between the Geth and Quarians, that the Geth can be integrated into Quarian envirosuits, taking the place of their normal VIs. So, who knows? It's also interesting that this novel came out much later than the Apex mission, because the Apex mission is vague enough that it doesn't necessarily confirm that the Chelacia was making its last bit of voyage to the Nexus. And the story ending in Annihilation is also vague enough that they can change their original plans if this was intended to lead up to a DLC. So again, this leaves the story on another cliffhanger. We have this massive crew of about 20,000 losing a decent portion of its crew, most of them being Drell, which only had about 4,500 Drell on board to begin with. We also now have all of the individuals who were woken up due to the plague that are now probably all suffering from severe mental distress. If they survive, they may have lost someone or may have been infected themselves. The scene of the plague was dark and bloody. I can't imagine the levels of trauma that they would have. And then we also have those who were not woken up and slept through all of these events. When they wake up, they're going to be confused and may have woken up to the loss of a loved one. The Chelacia that would have arrived in Andromeda would have looked very different than the one that left the Milky Way. And I'm forever sad that we never got this direct sequel, because I would have been really invested in the DLC after the events of Annihilation. So do I think we will get this sequel in the next game? I have no idea. I think you can only tell the conclusion of the Quarian Ark story by jumping to the year 2753 at the earliest, which are the last known whereabouts of the Quilicia. But realistically, their story should continue with them arriving in the Andromeda galaxy, which would bring that storyline to 2819 during Ryder's story. I don't see any other way to do it personally, especially with that tease from the ending of Andromeda with Ryder receiving the transmission. The natural progression of that story ends with the Quilicia in the Andromeda galaxy, on the Nexus, finally. In my opinion anyways. And yes, the next game seems to be teasing possible dark energy / space anomalies, and maybe time-related storylines. But even still, how could that even relate to the Quilicia? Maybe the Quilicia got caught in a black hole and ends up back in the Milky Way? Or maybe that incoming message was from another ship. Maybe the Jardan find them, or maybe another new alien finds them. Yes, I think there's possibilities there, but I think them arriving to the Nexus makes more sense, which would mean a return to the Andromeda galaxy in Mass Effect 5 if this arc becomes the game's focus. I also asked on Twitter of what people thought of this arc, if the Quilicia is Arc 6, or if this is a new arc. And first off, no one can confirm for sure if the Nexus is considered an arc in-game. But the general consensus is that no, it is not an arc. And several people think that this is a new arc. Again, I just don't know the context of why other arcs would be sent when all of the races were already on the initial 5 arcs. And the Quilicia left right as the Reaper War was beginning. According to one of the Batarians on board, he fled his planet just as the Reapers were attacking and was able to make it on the arc just in time. So realistically, if we're following the timeline of the trailer, Arc 6 still left before the Reaper War. But when? There would have been no time for an additional arc to really have left, unless it was actively leaving during the war, which wouldn't really make sense. And again, if this was a new arc, wouldn't we have records of it? Especially since it seems like the dialogue is pointing to some type of station or hub announcing that Arc 6 has departed. And I don't think this Arc 6 could be related to the future timeline of the game, based on where it is in the trailer. Nor do I think this could be an arc from Andromeda, because that doesn't really make sense. The initiative arrives in the Helios cluster and essentially only meet the hostile Ket and Angara. If the Angara were sending an arc, why would there be 6 of them? Their population doesn't seem large enough to warrant that many arcs carrying that many Angara to the Milky Way, especially if there are already Milky Way Angara, which is another theory in an upcoming video. But I don't think the Angara sending an arc to the Milky Way galaxy really makes sense, unless real-time travel is created. Maybe that's what this relay is. But even so, if the Angara decided to send Angara back to the Milky Way galaxy after the initiative arrives in the Helios cluster, even with real-time travel, that would still put them around the year 2819. And I've also seen people say that they think the next game will begin in the Milky Way, and then we will travel to the Andromeda galaxy. And yeah, maybe. I've already said that I think a lot of the visuals we're seeing are tied to the Milky Way galaxy for sure, but we have seen direct references to the 2819 timeline. But does the Mass Effect team have enough devs and resources and time to essentially start from scratch with 2 entire galaxies? That would require 2 galaxy maps, and to create every race we've seen so far. Development-wise, including both galaxies in the first new game is a lot. I don't really see it being feasible in this next game, which is being developed in Unreal, and Andromeda was in Frostbite. And although the Legendary Edition just released in 2021 on Unreal, the models, the textures, and all of the visuals are still dated. They're lower poly models, and the textures have less details than textures you'd see today in Unreal Engine. Not to mention having to start from scratch with all of the Andromeda Frostbite material. So realistically, I don't see it. Maybe if Mass Effect 5 gets a sequel, or is planned as a duology or trilogy, maybe. But for this first new game, which I've said feels like a soft reboot, I don't think so. And if that is what the storyline revolves around, whoever we are playing as leaving the Milky Way, going to Andromeda, if it's on an arc, those arcs left before Mass Effect 3. So again, I don't think that makes sense. An arc that leaves after Mass Effect 3 could be viable, but I just don't see the point in leaving the Milky Way galaxy, which would need to be repaired after the Reaper War, and would still be dealing with the aftermath of Shepard's choices. I don't know, a lot of this is just me thinking through all these theories and coming up with no solutions. Which I know that this is all early teasers intended to evoke nostalgia and get fans excited about all the possibilities. And I am probably looking too much into all of this, and that's totally fine. I love doing this stuff. And when we finally get new information about N7 Day this year, I can't wait to go back and see all the stuff that I was wrong or right about. Speculation is fun for me, and if you enjoy it, thank you for sharing your theories and entertaining mine. This game is still a ways away, and honestly, I think it may release around 2027 at the very earliest. So we have several years to break all of this down and analyze everything, which is the fun part. If you enjoy this, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more future Mass Effect content. My next 2 videos are planned around the Dark Energy and the Jardan, which I think could be the key to the next game. So be sure to check those out, and in the meantime, if you haven't heard about the new upcoming Sci-Fi Choice and Consequence RPG with a customizable and voiced protag that you can romance your companions with, check out my videos on Exodus. But let me know what you think about this arc. Do you think Arc 6 is the Keylessia? Do you think it's a new arc? If it is, who do you think is on it? Let me know all your thoughts below. And thank you for watching, and a special thank you to my channel members. Thank you for all your support. We're about to hit 10,000 subscribers, and I'll be doing a giveaway in my next video. Keela Salai, and see you next time.